Oh yeah, right. I forgot. I don't get comments on my videos. So you may be wondering why my voice sounds so different and why this video isn't on the False Wipe Gaming channel, and I have answers to those. So about the voice, I kidnapped Cullen so I could steal his office this week, which is why you're seeing close-ups of my ugly face as opposed to me in my natural habitat, my bedroom. But you may be wondering how in that situation they were still able to upload a video today, but we don't talk about that. Also, the video is on this channel because I can't hack, basically, meaning the whole kidnapping thing would have been unnecessary to begin with. But hey, at least doing this plan has given me the inspiration to cover a Pokemon I bet FSG has never even thought of talking about, because of how tall of a task it would be to cover. The Pokemon in question having 18 forms, but all with separate niches, and being at the top of the highest tier every generation, so at the top of its first generation, but it got banned from that highest tier. Today, we're talking about Riolu. Really? I thought I wrote a script for Arceus. Oh well. Anyway, you may have known Riolu for being the Prevo of the significantly more popular Lucario, but recently you may know it for being one of Ash's new Pokemon in the shockingly good Journeys series, where you likely dislike it for completely overshadowing both Dragonite and Gengar. But I must get to the point eventually, so we, or I, since I don't have a team of writers and editors, ask, how good was Riolu actually? This video will be going over these competitive formats. Unfortunately, Riolu was completely and utterly unusable in its debut generation of Diamond, Pearl, and Platinum overused. Firstly, its stats are just so bad, with its only even mediocre stat being Attack, but mainly it found itself outclassed by its evolution Lucario, but sadly Riolu never even found usage in either underused or never used. Luckily for Riolu though, this generation of Smogon added a new format called Little Cup, which is a format where only pre-evolved Pokemon were allowed and all of them were set to level 5, meaning that there was finally a spot for Riolu to shine as its garbage stats now looked fairly impressive. Now, in terms of base stat total, Riolu was still pretty bad, but in the same generation Skarmory and Breloom were excellent and overused, so stats aren't everything. It's how the stats are distributed that matters, and Riolu's are distributed very well. It can't switch into anything, but its attack makes it very strong, and while it's not zipping for everything, it's in a similar spot to its evolution, and that its speed is just good enough to get the job done. But what really made Riolu a great Pokemon was its move pool. Similarly to Lucario, it has a lot of moves, and that alone makes it a great sweeper, and its move pool also makes it very easy to slap on a team that has a rough patch Riolu could potentially fill. But instead of talking about how you could theoretically use it, let's talk about how it was used. The most popular Riolu set in Little Cup is an Agility set, which took Riolu's average speed stat and turned it into a Pokemon that could only be KO'd by either walling it, slapping a Choice Scarf on an already fast Pokemon, or by poking at its bad defenses with a priority move. And with the help of High Jump Kick, Crunch, and Ice Punch, it could super effectively hit most of the metagame. High Jump Kick, while risky, is an incredibly strong option as it can hit even Bronzor by 52%, which is crazy given how it's commonly considered to be one of the best physical walls in the tier. With that knowledge too, you could likely make an inference of the sheer number of Pokemon displaying Okos. But you could likely make the inference that Ghost types also exist, and they are immune to fighting moves, which is why Riolu runs Crunch to super effectively hit them. The only ghosts who don't get OHKO'd being Duskull and Drifloon, but even then they need heavy defense investment and an Oranberry in order to not get torched. Ice Punch, on the other hand, handles plenty of Ice-weak Pokemon, most notably Gligar, who is OHKO'd by it. Though some players prefer Thunder Punch, as Mantike will no longer wall it, along with Zen Headbutt to deal with Krogunk, who often outclasses it as a fighting type. Though Ice Punch is still preferred due to the larger amount of Pokemon it could deal with. Agility Riolu is EV'd in a way that allows it to outspeed all but 3 Pokemon, all of which can only do so with a Choice Scarf, and the rest of the investment is put into attack and defenses. Swords Dance Riolu is one of the ever common sets, and while it's stupendously similar to the Agility set, they serve vastly different purposes. While the Agility set attempts to destroy opponents in the late game, the Swords Dance set attempts to break as many walls as possible, with High Jump Kick doing obscene damage, Crunch OHKOing every Ghost type in the tier, and Ice Punch mauling every Gligar attempting a swap. Given its mediocre speed, however, along with the fact that if a Riolu user fails to predict a Gligar swap, it'll result in it getting outspeed KO'd, which meant some users would instead prefer running a priority move such as Quick Attack or Bullet Punch to get the jump on Pokemon who would otherwise outspeed it. Item-wise, instead of running a Life Orb for extra damage, particularly making it able to OHKO Bronzor, some preferred running Focus Sash, as it would allow it to survive the hits of Pokemon that would otherwise outspeed it, and be able to take them out. Though Life Orb is still preferred more often, as not being able to OHKO Bronzor means it can recycle stall your high jump kicks until they run out of PP. In terms of EVs, it's the same deal as the Agility set. The final prominent Riolu set was the Lead set, which always ran Focus Sash to ensure it would survive at least one hit, while also making it able to use Counter, which absolutely mauled any Pokemon who thought they could hit it in the physical side. High Jump Kick is there as a stab option once again, while Bullet Punch can clean through any other Focus Sash leads. The set is simple, but it gets the job done. In terms of other options for all of its sets, Blaze Kick, Earthquake, and Rock Slide make decent coverage options, but again, they're not preferred as they super effectively hit less of a metagame. Though, like Thunder Punch and Zen Headbutt, they can be effective if the team you're building struggles against any Pokemon weak to those moves. Some players also prefer to run Brick Break or Force Palm as their stab option, as they have less risk involved, though these are not viable options on the Swords Dance set, as OHKOing Bronzor of High Jump Kick is a requirement. You could also run a Jolly Nature on your Agility Riolu, as it outspeeds every Pokemon of the meta, though the rarity of Scarf, Voltorb, Diglett, and Elekid made this not worth it, along with losing a lot of the power you would get by running Adamant Nature. Teammates I would suggest giving Riolu would be Houndour, as it can KO ghost types by pursuit trapping them, while also taking a Will-O-Wisp with its Flash Fire ability. Why Not can also trap the opponent with Shadow Take and lock them into a move using Encore, allowing Riolu to freely set up afterwards. Ghastly can also help Riolu, as it can act as pursuit bait, meaning that Ghastly can swap to Riolu as the opponent swaps to their Dark type, meaning that you're now in the superior position. But despite my praises of Riolu, it's not perfect in Little Cup, and as such I shall mention all of its checks and counters. Oranberry users who don't get OHKO'd by Riolu can slowly whittle it down, as Riolu takes 3 turns to take them out. Also, as I had previously mentioned, priority moves ruin it, while physically defensive Duskull and Drifloon have to be wary of Crunch, but can still end its sweep with a Will-O-Wisp, cutting the power of its physical moves by half. Focus Sash users can also cut its sweep short, as they can live a hit and KO Riolu in return. Oranberry Bronzor can also successfully wall and KO non-Swords Dance variants of Riolu, and Swords Dance variants of Riolu can easily be revenge killed by a faster Pokemon. If Riolu isn't running Ice Punch, then ground types absolutely maul it too. Riolu also hates paralysis, so Chinchou can join the game of ghosts in the checks department. Honestly though, if you play smart, then Riolu is potentially a very dangerous sweeper or wall breaker in the game, whose unpredictable nature propelled it to a niche but still great status in its debut generation of Little Cup. Generation 5, aka the generation of immense power creep full of strong dragons, spiders, and dangerous permanent weather. In this environment, there's no way Riolu could stand a single chance, right? Well, it may seem like a joke at first due to its low stats, but Riolu actually had a legitimate spot in Black and White Overused. Granted, it wasn't seen often due to those stats, which made it incredibly difficult to use effectively, but when Riolu got the ball rolling, you would wish you were instead fighting Jirachi. Actually, fuck that thing, nah, I'd rather be annoyed by literally anything else. So, what made this adorable thing so annoying? Well, it's priority phasing. But how? Riolu doesn't have any tools to do that, Ron. While the advent of hidden abilities gifted its evolution a situational one in Justified, Riolu gained a game-changing one in Prankster, which gives all of its status moves priority. You can probably see where this is going. Roar is a negative priority move that forces the opponent to swap, but with Copycat, which gains priority from Prankster, it could make its opponent never even be able to attack. But that's not even the only thing Copycat is capable of, as it can also copy opponents' moves to finish them off. Granted, this is not recommended and overused unless you're packing Protect, but when combined with a hazard setter like Ferrothorn who can stack Stealth Rocks and Spikes, while living to continue dropping them after an opposing Rapid Spin, this naturally meant that one of Riolu's biggest friends in overuse was Rain teams, though Sand also fits very well on a Riolu team, as Tyranitar can set up rocks while pursuit trapping annoying Magic Bounce and Magic Guard users. Substitute could also be used to ensure Riolu could continue to annoy its opponents, while Drain Punch was there as an attacking option, as to not die by Taunt, along with it being able to heal up just a bit of health. Another addition from Gen 5 also propelled Riolu to having this niche, which was the brand new item of Eviolite, which granted Riolu a 1.5 boost to its god-awful defenses, making it able to live more hits than before. But this is mainly there to help it live against opposing priority. In terms of EVs, it's obviously ran max HP, but it put just enough defenses to stand against priority users, put some EVs into speed to outspeed Pokemon in its very populated speed tier, and the rest is put into special defense. In terms of teammates, while I had already mentioned its use in rain teams of Ferrothorn, a lot of its use in sand of Tyranitar, another crucial, if not required part of these teams is a spin blocker, of which your best option is Gengar, given its extreme offensive presence, though Jellicent could be used on rain to replace Tentacruel, as like it walls the dangerous Keldeo, though this is not recommended unless you need to slap on an extra teammate you wouldn't get from running the two of them. And speaking of rain, Sizzlewurk should be put as your Pursuit Trapper on most teams due to its S-tier typing and ability. Hell, I'd actually recommend it on sand teams too due to its immunity to it. Late game sweepers like Salamence are also very helpful, as once Riolu's chain is destructed, they can have a field day of the rest of the opposing team. In terms of other ways to use Riolu, there's not much, which is why you hardly see them, but they exist. Iron Defense can be used to deal with physical attackers, Agility can be used to outspeed opposing priority users, Toxic can cripple walls after it runs out of Copycat PP, Screech can force switches, allowing you to swap to a more horrifying Pokemon, and Crunch can hit weakened ghost types. Now to checks and counters. I'm pretty sure Riolu could give 10 consecutive middle fingers to both Espeon and Xatu, and that would only still be half of the assault that they would want to give them. Yes, their Magic Bounce ability instead says no you, and Riolu gets a taste of its own medicine by phasing it out instead. Magic Coat, which has the same effect as Magic Bounce, but is instead a move, can be used by faster Pokemon to end its chain, although this was a bit less common due to Magic Bounce's superiority, though it shall still be considered. Magic Guard users, while not being nearly as annoying, are still a pain as they have an immunity to passive damage, while Levitate and Flying type Pokemon have a Spikes immunity. Although Rock-weak Flying types still need to be wary of Stealth Rock, as they can take considerable damage from it. Soundproof and Section Cups Pokemon are also immune to Roar, so while they're not as common and overused, it's still something you'll have to be worried about. Regenerator Pokemon are also a huge pain to Riolu, as the ability allows them to heal for switching out, effectively making them immune to its effects. Priority users who outspeed Riolu, or priority users who outpriority Riolu can also end its chain, though Riolu, instead of using Copycat again, can just go for a Roar again to continue its chain. Granted, this is assuming Riolu can live the priority move, which it often can because of Substitute and Eviolite. But you can also stop Riolu before it even starts the chain by Okoing it, which, let's be honest, isn't that difficult, statusing it, or taunting it, though Riolu with Protect can predict the taunt and prevent it by copycatting afterwards. So, while Riolu is full of issues, if you get it going, it can potentially win games, assuming your opponent doesn't forfeit out of frustration before you do. As such, Riolu somehow found itself being a legitimate force in Black and White overused, though rare. But it doesn't end there, as Riolu's awful stats propelled it to indefinitely frustrate players in lower tiers, most notably Never Used, where the amount of Magic Bounce users dropped to 1, and the amount of Magic Guard and Regenerator users was similarly small, along with spin blocking being at its easiest, as the lower power level just gave it more Pokemon to feast on. Here Riolu ran the exact same set, just this time he was in a different environment. In this environment particularly, Riolu dropped the Special Defense and Speed EVs to run max HP, max defense, which helps it against opposing priority. Teammates Riolu needed were the same as before, but this time you didn't need to pack a Weather Setter, so the final slot could instead be used up by a Cleric, like Alomomola, who could continue Riolu's disrupted chain with a Heal Bell or Wish. Overall, Riolu cemented itself as a surprising but deadly pick and Never Used. Honestly, though, I don't think I'll ever be able to stop talking about Riolu in Gen 5, as its garbage stats allowed it to fall down the tiering run even further as it came back to Little Cup just as strong as ever. This time, it continued to hold on to his older cousin Lucario's greatest strength, as the power level in Little Cup was low enough for Riolu to run two completely different sets. Obviously, Riolu continued to annoy its opponents with the Roar set, while the circumstances were very close to the ones in Overused and Never Used. Close enough, in fact, that I have nothing more to mention on that set, other than that Swagger was often used on them. But Riolu's other set also utilized Copycat, but instead of stalling opponents, it instead swept them. Swords Dance is used to boost Riolu's attack, and Crunch exists to hit Ghosts and Eviolite's Slowpoke. And the new buffed High Jump Kick exists as a stab option. But where this set really kicks in is with Copycat, which After reuse of a high jump kick gives Riolu a devastating 130 base power priority move. Having priority on Copycat now allowed Riolu to run a more defensive EV spread while also remaining as an offensive threat. Though it's debated whether or not you should run Eviolite on this set for more defenses, or Life Orb for extra damage. Similarly to Riolu's Agility set, which this one effectively killed, it's recommended you save this for the late game, where Ghost and Psychic-type Pokemon are out of the picture. And as such, a Pursuit Trapper is an almost required teammate for Riolu. But Riolu being especially useful in the late game didn't mean it wasn't useless in the early game, as it can copycat against threatening Pokemon such as Dratini. Riolu is also annoyed by Sturdy and Focus Sash, so a hazard setter like Dwebble, Ferocity, or Ammonite can prove very useful. Gothita was also a never Shadow Tag Pokemon, and while Wynot is still equally great, it at least acts as a never option. Other moves Riolu can use are Blaze Kick, Rock Slide, or Zen Headbutt for coverage. Granted, not being able to hit ghost types as hard does make these less useful. Roleplay was sometimes used as a recovery option against Regenerator users instead of Drain Punch, but this was far too gimmicky to actually be useful. Same with a Nasty Plot set, given Riolu's awful special attack. Bulky Poison types also walled Riolu, so packing a Psychic-type Pokemon would always be helpful. Hippopotas could tank an Eviolite Riolu's High Jump Kick while phasing it out, though it often falls to Life Orb Riolu, and sacrificing a Pokemon that forces a Crunch out of Riolu is a great way of revenge killing it, as it loses the ability to have priority on High Jump Kick. Also, I forgot to mention it at a point that would sound natural, but Team Preview killed the lead set in Little Cup. Overall, while Gen 5 is the beginning of the end for many Pokemon, it was, weirdly enough, Riolu's best generation as a return to Little Cup similarly strong, while somehow having a niche in the same tier as his older cousin. Unfortunately, the newly buffed Defog completely ruined any semblance of a niche Riolu could have possibly had in any Gen 6 singles tier above Little Cup. But thankfully, it was still usable there as it continued to use its old Swords Dance set from Gen 5, though it, unfortunately, wasn't as useful as the set became more gimmicky due to the new fairy types that walled Riolu's classic set, and he now suffered more severe competition than ever with other fighting types, really showing how the uniqueness of the set started to become less valued as power creep continued to hit hard. Instead of solely running Crunch for coverage, Riolu now sometimes needed more options, so it would either go Protect to scout out certain options and come back copycatting the opponent's own moves, Zen Headbutt to deal with Krogunk, Fungus, and Ghastly, and Iron Tail to deal with those pesky fairies. Riolu ran two different types of EV spreads, which ran different items. Offensive spreads of Riolu utilized Life Orb, while bulkier ones held Eviolite for extra bulk, or Roselli Berry to safely set up on fairy types who thought they could switch into it. Riolus who held that item always ran Iron Tail. Essentially, Riolus now suffered more severely from the 4 move slots syndrome, and instead of making it unpredictable, it instead crippled it, as it now required more team support than it ever has in Little Cup, so it can safely sweep in the late game. Support it needed were Pursuit Trappers to beat Ghost types as always, allowing Riolu to actually be used once they take them out. Just this time, you were now relegated to only using Pawniard or Stunky, as their typing allowed them to deal with fairy types, though Stunky was usually preferred as it had access to the extraordinarily helpful Memento, allowing Riolu to more easily set up, while also allowing you to run Honedge, who also packed Pursuit and could deal with the dangerous Galewing's Fletchling, along with those pesky fairies, which you could use Riolu to lure them into, to put yourself in a position where you could take them out with Honedge. Ponyta yet again made a good teammate, as it can absorb fire moves while also burning opponents, while Gothita became the new premier Shadow Tag user, as while it lacked Encore, it could more easily deal with poison types. And as always, Riolu loved a hazard setter, but while Riolu mainly ran those 2 variations of the same set, there were still other ways to use them. Other items you could use are Berry Juice, which can be used as recovery, but Riolu's useless defensive stats made it so Eviolite and Roselli Berry were preferred. But also Focus Sash purely for hyper offense teams, though this had no other use in other team styles. Rock Slide could be used as an alternative coverage option to deal with both flying and bulky fire types. Magnet Rise can and be used to escape Diglett, and yes, Riolu does learn Magnet Rise somehow, and Substitute could be used as a defensive option, but not being able to get a boost from Swords Dance is not a good thing. Riolu, with the advent of Fairy types, now also had more checks and counters than it ever has. Abra often holds Focus Ash, meaning that Riolu can't OHKO it, and as such, Abra can just reciprocate its efforts with a Psychic, OHKOing it in return. Same goes for Gen 5. Flying types, particularly Max Speed Fletchling, absolutely hammered Riolu since Riolu stopped running or even considering Ice Punch. It now meant that bulky grass types as well, who didn't fall to one of Riolu's coverage options, were now usually able to quickly take out Riolu. Bulky fire and ghost types backing Will-O-Wisp had no big problem with taking Riolu on, and heavily scared it, while Gothita could trap it. Although if Riolu got a Swords Dance boost of hazards up, then Gothita should be worried. But honestly, Riolu just kind of felt like a shadow of its old self in Gen 6 Little Cup. One change like the Fairy type can sometimes severely affect an old Pokemon, and while Riolu's best generation was 5, it couldn't find the same success in V1 after it. Riolu continued its tricks into Gen 7, but as the power level just continued to increase, the use of Life Orb and Roselli Berry died in favor of exclusively holding on to Eviolite, as to not be forgotten in the metagame, as it didn't get any new moves for it to stay relevant otherwise. But fortunately, all of this did not mean Riolu was completely forgotten, as it was unique enough to still be able to be used, despite being outclassed. Now it was more necessary than ever to run Adamant Nature as to be able to break walls that otherwise wouldn't be able to, assuming you can even set up a Swords Dance, as its frailty just continued to bite it, even with Eviolite. Teammates were similar to before, just this time Alolan Grimer outclassed Stunky as a Pursuit user, with its superior stats and access to knockoff, and having a second Dark type to deal with Ghost and Psychic types were now more valuable than ever. Flying types are now a bigger issue to Riolu, so having a better way to deal with those goes a long way, and the best option is Magnemite, who can hit both Flying and Fairy types super effectively, while also pivoting to it with Volt Switch, though Chinchou is similarly good in this role. With Gothita's ban from Gen 7 Little Cup, the new best way to deal with poison types was by trapping them with Diglett. Though this wasn't a bad thing, as having access to Memento is always helpful towards Riolu. Alternative moves Riolu can use are Ice Punch, Rock Slide, and Poison Jab, and Earthquake, though none of these are quite useful enough to be worth it. Even Poison Jab, which sounds like a dream due to the existence of fairies, but is still resisted by ghosts, making it entirely unviable. Riolu's checks and counters remained the same, just this time, just more Pokemon fulfilled those roles, like Marini for instance, which walled literally every Riolu set. So yeah, Riolu is sadly mediocre in Gen 7, but the limited Pokédex of Gen 8 should make Riolu more useful. Right? Right. Unfortunately, Riolu is so bad in Generation 8, it doesn't even have a Smogon analysis, meaning that I'll have to theory-craft why Riolu is so uncommon in high-level Little Cup play. And oh god, there's a lot of them. Heavy-duty boots is everywhere, making hazards less useful. Pursuit is gone, meaning that Ghost and Psychics are now more powerful than ever. And it faced even more severe competition due to the new Galarian Farfetch'd, who similarly to Mienfoo and Timber is excellent. Riolu required a similar amount of team support as the last generation, but with the removal of Pursuit, it was a lot harder, and as such, not worth it when combined with a generation's power creep. But regardless, I'll tell you the few changes that Riolu team saw. Due to the bigoted nature of the Galarians, Alolan Grimer cannot be found as it is not part of Galar's 3 Pokédexes, meaning that you had to revert back to using Stunky as your Poison Dark type, and yeah, that's it. Gen 8 did not give Riolu any new tools to play with, meaning that he continued to use the exact same set, and as such Riolu's checks and counters remained the same as they just continued to beat the poor thing to a pulp. But since Riolu is so bad, and I have nothing more to say about it, other than possible moveset buffs that I could use to make it more viable, my guess is that if it gained close combat, that alone would make it more useful. Well, as it would be far less risky to use, unlike High Jump Kick, because close combat at least doesn't have 50% recoil damage from a Miss, Protect, or Ghost types. Knockoff also would have been more viable than ever, given that it's both more powerful than Crunch and can remove the infinitely annoying heavy-duty boots, which now allow the team to wear down the opposing team with hazards. The final move pool buff I would suggest would be Iron Head, but which, while being less powerful than Meteor Mash and Iron Tail, is more consistent with 100% accuracy and a 30% flinch chance to boot. But sadly, Riolu did not receive those buffs, and as such, all I can see Riolu doing is toiling down into obscurity as the generations go on. A sad fate for an NFE Pokemon who was once usable and overused. But before I conclude this video, I must mention why I did not bring up Riolu in VGC, and it's because I could not find any notable uses for it, and there are good reasons for that too. While its prankster ability may seem like a boon, with it getting coaching in Generation 8 and the ability to set up a priority trick room with the new Dynamax, so far they've only proven to be gimmicks, as Riolu's frailty basically means it has to hold onto a Focus Sash if it wants to do anything in a game, and even then there are better prankster Pokemon like Whimsicott, who sports a better move pool and can actually dish out decent damage with a Moonblast or Dazzling Gleam, meaning it's not completely crippled by Taunt. But even then it still has a priority taunt of its own, meaning that with proper prediction, it won't get taunted anyway, unlike Riolu. And don't even get me started with earlier generations, where it's had even fewer options, and Whimsicott still outclassed it. Even in Gen 4, when Whimsicott didn't exist, Riolu also didn't have Prankster, so it was still unusable. Riolu seems like a fun gimmick, but that's where it should stay in doubles, as it is not recommended for any tournament use in VGC. So how good was Riolu actually? Well, it started niche but fantastic in Gen 4 Little Cup, and then it got a hidden ability in Gen 5 so good it propelled it to use and overused while it continued its reign as a fantastic Little Cup Pokemon, until the fairies arrived in Gen 6 to stop Riolu's parade, as it just got worse as the generations would go on. It's not often you hear a story as unconventional as Riolu's. He's an example of how one little change such as an ability can completely change the way a Pokemon is used, and how yet another smallest change, such as the fairy type, can slowly kill a Pokemon. But I've yet to actually answer the question, so I'd say that overall Riolu was just kind of okay. Not surprising for a Pokemon who's not even fully evolved. Thanks so much for everyone who just so happened to click on this video, and enjoy it. And as always, if you liked the video, make sure to subscribe for more bi-weekly videos from your infinitely handsome host. I'm talking about me, not Colin, by the way. His team uploads weekly, which is something I can't even dream of doing. Also, YouTube shockingly isn't my only internet presence. I know I don't use your average social media like Twitter, but I'm going to try so hard to ever use that dumpster fire of a website. Oh god. Anyway, see y'all.